Right, this is the video most people have been waiting for, I would imagine. It's combat. Right, combat between opposing units occurs during the combat phase. Only adjacent combat units may be attacked, with the exception of bombardments, which we've already covered in a separate video. If using hidden sort of movement and stuff like that, at the beginning of the combat phase, both players reveal all their units and leaders that are within an enemy line of sight, even if there will be no combat. Fair enough. You've got retreat before combat. I don't know if I've covered this, but we'll go through it again. Cavalry units, vedettes and horse artillery stacked with cavalry may elect to retreat 1 or 2 hexes out of an enemy zone of control prior to combat. Vedettes must always retreat. During the retreat, you mustn't enter an enemy zone of control, except for vedette's zone of control. I didn't even know a vedette had a zone of control. A unit can only take 1 retreat before combat per turn. Horse artillery that begins in the combat phase on its own or with an all cavalry stack in an enemy zone control can go about 1 hex for retreat before combat. Horse artillery that retreats before combat may still bombard that turn. A lone horse artillery unit in the enemy zone of control of enemy cavalry may not retreat. Now, if you're cavalry but you're in the zone of control of enemy cavalry, you can't retreat if they've got an equal or greater movement allowance. Now, to be quite honest, as far as I know, all cavalry have a 6 or a 7. So, I suppose, yeah, a 7 in the zone of control of a load of 6s wouldn't be able to retreat. Yeah, okay. No, supply and demoralization do not affect a unit's ability to retreat before combat. Leaders that retreat before combat do not roll for capture, unlike normal retreats. Advanced after combat. There's no advance after combat when a unit retreats before combat. Right. Defining combat. All engaged units must attack. The phasing player must define all his combats before resolving them. Right. He can define his attacks freely, provided all enemy units in his zone of control are attacked or bombarded. Now, this is quite a key concept, that you can do what's called soaking up attacks. So if you have, like, if you're attacking a sort of hex, but you've got another unit in a zone of control of an enemy unit next to that hex, normally you'd have to attack both of them, but you can use like a bombardment attack to actually bombard the adjacent unit, and that means you don't have to attack it. So units from both these hexes here could attack without having to attack that, as long as it's been bombarded. Okay, now there are exceptions to this in terms of you have to attack. Units in towns, improved positions or chateaus do not have to attack. An enemy artillery unit in an enemy zone of control does not have to attack if other units in the hex do so. An artillery unit that bombarded this turn cannot join in an attack. A unit in road march cannot join in an attack. A cavalry unit that has charged this turn cannot join in an attack. An artillery unit bombards a hex, as I just said, it frees friendly units adjacent to that hex from having to attack. That's really important. That rivers in combat, adjacent units on the opposite side of an unbridged, unfrozen river may not be attacked, but they may be bombarded. Adjacent units. That's an exception to the rule about bombardment. Normally you have to bombard at 2 or 3 hexes, but in the event if you're adjacent but there's a river, unbridged, unfrozen river between you can bombard adjacent units. Right, you can use multi-hex combat. So the example here, you've got loads of attacking units can attack from loads of different hexes. That's quite normal. This one's a bit abnormal. It's something I wouldn't advise you to do. But it depends on the circumstance that you can actually attack multiple hexes. So that attacking unit can attack both of those, and that one can attack both of those. Not something I tend to do very often, but you can do it. Combat procedure. You've got the phasing player conducts attacks in any order he desires, and they're resolved one at a time, and you must be fully resolved before proceeding to the next attack. What you do is you compare the combined attack strength of the participating attack units against the total defense strength modified by terrain of the defending units. This is expressed in an odds ratio. So this is all pretty normal stuff for a hex encounter war game. Round off this odds ratio downwards to confirm to the next lower odds ratio on the combat's result table. So if we have a combat results table, you can, oops, sorry for that wobbly. You can see that you've got your ratios, and you can see you've got your dice rolls, and then you've got your results. So that's all pretty straightforward as well. Okay, once you've done your odds column, you roll your die, cross-referencing the die result with the odds column given in the combat's results table. Right. What you need to do, you need to adjust your casualty level markers on your casualty sheets, which we've discussed over here, to reflect how many casualties are inflicted on the formation, because that's important. It can cause a formation to be demoralized. Right, if we're looking at before we look at combat results, what they actually mean, you're looking at look at combat modifiers. The terrain effects are very important. There's loads of things like there's a terrain effects table. Just a second, you're just going to have to excuse me for being all over the place here. So on the reverse of your terrain effects for movement, there's a terrain effects for combat summary. Now there are loads and loads of these. I will not go through them all, so it'll take forever, but there's things like towns, slopes, streams and trestles, woods, bridges, crests, chateaus, marshes, rivers and lakes, all can have an impact on the combat strengths. Now, that can mean your defender can be increased, but it can also affect your attacker, which is something that wasn't implied in the previous paragraph. But yes, it's not just the defender that's affected by terrain, it's the attacker as well. Okay. Combined arms, if you've got cavalry, artillery and infantry in an attack, that'll give you a 1-column shift to the right on your CRT table. Okay, that's a column shift, that's not a dice modifier, which is a mistake some people make. Combined arms doesn't apply for a defender, even if they have all 3 unit types in a defending hex. There's rules for staking the guard. There are certain types of guard units like the old guard, guard and guard, but not guard cavalry or young guard units on both sides. Once per game, the player may stake his guard units in any one combat, and you receive a 1-column favourable shift on the CRT. That's a shift to the right. You're never required to stake the guard. And the guard unit can be used in combat without being staked. Right. If any infantry of the guard is involved in an attack at any time and the results are AE, AR and EX, the demoralisation of all friendly formations whose officers were in 10 hexes or currently have no officer but have units within 10 hexes are immediately and permanently reduced by 1. Sorry, reduced by 4. Now that's a rule I didn't know. Interesting that. No formation can... staking the guard is not something I normally do, but that's just if guard are involved in an attack at any time. It's not staking the guard. So yeah, an AE, an AR and an EX result. Yeah, I can see what it means. It's basically saying that if your guard units mess up an attack, it affects the morale of the rest of the army. Yeah. And it says, yeah, it's permanently reduced by 4. Whoa. Definitely didn't know that rule. No formation can have its morale reduced more than once per game. French cavalry corps and formations with 4 or fewer units do not have their demoralisation level reduced. So yeah, the guard are powerful units, but they're also units that if you mess up with them, it's at the detriment to the rest of your army. There's a special rule for Napoleon. If Napoleon is stacked with engaged force, the odds for the combat shift 1 in his favour. Okay, does not apply to bombardment charges. That's not something I advise you do unless you're absolutely desperate, because if you lose Napoleon, that's no massive loss to an army. You've got, oh dear, what have we got here? Yeah, there's other combat modifiers that you need to look at, such as weather. But particularly things like snowstorms, thunderstorms, rain, and mud, they can actually reduce the effectiveness of certain units, particularly artillery. In terms of your combat results, we've looked at the combat results table. Now let's have a look at the actual the meaning of the codes. You've got AE, all attacking units, combat units are eliminated. AR, AR2, AR3, all attacking combat units must retreat 1, 2 or 3 hexes. You've got AR asterisk and DR asterisk. Now these are specials that these results can be converted to shock. We'll do shock in a second if in certain terrain. I'm not going to list all of that. You've got DR, DR2, 3 and 4, all defending units must retreat 1, 2 or 3 or 4 hexes. DE, all defending units are destroyed. Exchange, all combat units on the weaker side are eliminated, and the stronger side eliminates units which total at least 50% of the combat strength of the weaker side. Now that's important. Sometimes people in other games, you get used to the fact that an exchange means exactly what it says. You lose as many strength points as the opposing unit, but it's not in this. It's the weaker side. Right? It's not even the attacking or defending side. It says on the weaker side, all units are eliminated. That is really, really important. Shock results. There's a special table for shock results. There's the procedure. Well, firstly, you have to get a shock result, which can be AR asterisk, DR asterisk in certain terrain, or it could be SK for shock. Okay. Now, to actually do shock, what you have to do is the attacker and defender have to nominate a unit that is in the attacking hex or defending hex, and you look at your initiative value. Okay, so say they got the old guard with there, they've got an initiative value of 4, and say they were attacking Constantine's cavalry here, they have an initiative of 3. All right, so you look it up on this table, but what you do then is you then throw 1 dice for each side, and what you do, if you throw a 1 or a 2, you add 0 to your initiative. 3 or 4 add 1, and 5 and 6 you add 2. Okay, then you consult the modified initiative to get your results. Okay, now the shock tables its codes are pretty much the same. The only difference is the 1R result on the shock table, and that's you must reduce 1 attacking and 1 defending unit. The owner must reduce either the strongest or the best initiative unit involved. A little bit on exchanging artillery units that did not participate in combat, which are stacked in units which did may be used to satisfy an exchange. Overrunning cavalry, that's part of cavalry charges, must be the first to be eliminated. And you must compare the unmodified face value of strength points. So the strength, say a unit was doubled and it was attacked, you don't count the strength points as being doubled when you're doing exchanges. Okay. Next important thing here is we've got retreats. Now, the owning player must move his units or stack, retreating together, 1 or more hexes as specified by the result. A retreating combat unit may not cross a prohibited hex side, enter an enemy zone of control, or a hex occupied by enemy combat units, or exceed stacking limits. Friendly units do not negate enemy zones of control for the purpose of this combat unit's retreat. That is really important again. That's the main way you inflict a lot of casualties in this game, is you sort of surround units or partially surround them, forcing them to retreat through an enemy zone of control. Retreating friendly unit may enter a hex occupied by a friendly unit, but that unit immediately comes out of road march, if that was applicable. Combat units may retreat into the zone of control of a vedette, or even into a hex currently occupied by an enemy vedette if no other path of retreat is available. The enemy vedette is displaced. You've got retreat across bridges. Unit that retreat across bridges or pontoons risk elimination and must roll a die. The first unit to cross the bridge is permanently eliminated on a 6. Therefore, add +1 to the die for every retreating unit that follows. Either the second unit would be permanently eliminated on a 5 or a 6. Right, for pontoons, it's slightly different. The first retreating unit is eliminated on a 4, 5 or 6. And for each successive unit you add 1 to it again. The owning player chooses the order of retreat. Retreats across damaged bridges are not allowed, and any retreating units are automatically permanently eliminated. Units unable to retreat fully is eliminated. If any part of it is blocked by enemy zones of control, the unit is placed in the units awaiting recovery box. So they're the ones that you can recover at half strength. Right, this is an interesting rule. If a unit could not retreat fully because of a prohibited hex size or enemy units only, roll a dice to determine which box to place it in. So it's 1 to 3 is the units awaiting recovery, 4 to 6 is permanently eliminated. Right, paths of the retreat. Unit must end up its retreat the specified distance from the starting hex. Each hex can only be entered once, so you can't zag back and forwards between hexes to satisfy the number of hexes retreat. The retreat should shorten the distance to the formation's baggage train or to a friendly supply source, or both. If 2 or more paths are open, it must move in the better terrain, preferring roads and trails and roadless marches. Displacement, if a unit's path is available to a retreating force but would cause it to exceed the stacking limits, then 1 or more combat units must be displaced to make room for it. Displaced units retreat 1 hex, observing all restrictions governing retreat after combat. Right, if a displaced unit cannot retreat, the original retreated forces is eliminated instead and will enter the units awaiting recovery table. If the retreating force contains cavalry, the displacing unit must make an initiative test. If it fails, it's eliminated instead, placing the UAR box. Trains can never displace. Right, once we've got retreat after combat, we've got advance after combat. So whenever an enemy stack is eliminated or forced to retreat, the owning player may advance friendly leaders and 1 or more friendly units that participate in the combat, whether as an attacker or a defender, and occupy the vacated hex and not beyond it. So 1 infantry plus all cavalry in a given attack may advance if no unit leader is present, or the leader itself doesn't advance. If a leader is in a stack and advances, all undemoralised infantry and cavalry may advance with him. Artillery never advance after combat. If defenders vacate combat as a result of a bombardment, any phasing infantry or cavalry adjacent to that hex, along with any leaders, may advance into the vacated hex. Such advances take place after all bombardments are concluded. A unit cannot advance if it has an unresolved combat to perform. Combat units and leaders may choose not to advance. Demoralised or out of command units may not advance. Victorious combat units may advance into the vacated enemy hex, even if they advance from one enemy zone of control to another. Units may not violate stacking limits after an advance. A victorious overrunning cavalry unit that remains in the hex counts against stacking. Okay, that's it. That is a lot of stuff to remember. It's a lot odd, this game, that even though it has a fairly simple rule set coming in at 23 pages, that is highly deceptive. I would say that this has a medium complexity rule set. even though there's so few pages of rules, because of all the moving parts and all the exceptions and little variations, things that you wouldn't expect in a hex and counter game. It's got these little quirks about it. Okay, that's it for combat.